This man noticed something strange. He told his wife that every so often, a woman on a bicycle would pass through the intersection, followed by a man carrying flowers, and then a yellow car. But his wife didn't believe a word of it. And just then,
Lady, flowers, and...
Truman, this is silly.
There it is! There it is! There's the tinted beetle! Yes!
the reason Truman was able to notice was because they kept going around in a loop, circling again and again. But things were about to get even crazier. Truman suddenly started the car, and like a madman, began driving in circles himself, shouting that he was heading to Atlantic City. Then he stopped circling and drove in that direction. But guess what? The previously empty road was instantly jammed with cars. He had no choice but to back up. He started circling again and shouted that he was going to New Orleans instead. But this time, Truman didn't go where he said he would. He turned back onto the road from before, and sure enough, the previously jammed intersection was suddenly wide open. Then Truman came to a bridge. He handed the steering wheel to his wife, closed his eyes, and floored it.
Truman! We shouldn't be doing this, Truman! We're breaking the law! Oh, my!
You can do it!
Please don't, please!
You can make it!
Oh, Truman! Oh, no! Run for the bridge!
Because of his fear of the ocean, this was the only way Truman could cross the bridge. But then something even more absurd happened. A wall of fire suddenly erupted on the road. But Truman didn't stop. He just slammed the gas and blasted right through it.
Oh my, Truman! We're on fire!
It's okay!
We're on fire!
It's okay, it's just smoke! It's just smoke! You okay?
Yes!
Want to do it again?
No! Truman, stop!
Afterwards, his terrified wife gradually calmed down. But just then, sirens started blaring up ahead, and the road was completely blocked off. When Truman pulled up, a cop told him there'd been a toxic leak up ahead and ordered them to evacuate immediately. Truman bought it at first, but as he was leaving, the cop accidentally called him by name, even though they'd supposedly never met before. That's when it hit Truman. Everything around him was fake. He'd been played like a fool for 30 whole years. From the day he was born, Truman had been broadcast live 24/7, all because a director wanted to make a reality show. 1.7 billion people watched him take his first steps. 220 countries watched him grow up. Truman lived on a place called Seahaven Island. On the surface, it looked like a perfectly normal town, but in reality, it was a massive studio set, so enormous, it's hard to even imagine. In The Truman Show, aside from Truman himself, everyone else was an actor. Thousands of cameras recorded every moment of his life, and the show had never once gone off the air. Every morning when he left the house, Truman would greet his neighbor.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Then, just as Truman was heading to work, something fell out of the sky. Truman nearly jumped out of his skin. When he went to check it out, he realized it was a studio light. He was completely baffled, wondering why on earth that thing fell from the sky. Later, while driving, a news bulletin came over the radio. Moments ago, a plane flying over Seahaven had malfunctioned and shed a part. Hearing that, Truman didn't think much of it. Every day before work, he'd pick up a fashion magazine for his wife, and every time he walked past this spot, a pair of twin old men would show up, greet Truman, and then pin him against the wall to plug a product. Truman was an insurance salesman, but every day at work, he'd secretly make a phone call to the Fiji Islands Directory Service, looking for a woman named Lauren. But every time, he was told no such person existed. And that fashion magazine, it wasn't really for his wife. After making sure no one was around, Truman would fake a cough and quickly rip out the model's eyes from the pictures. It was his little secret. Then his boss assigned him to go to a nearby island to close an insurance deal. But when he heard this, Truman immediately resisted, coming up with every excuse not to go, until his boss threatened him, "If you don't go, you might get fired." So Truman reluctantly went to the dock to buy a ticket. He tried to play it cool as he approached the boat, but when he spotted a half-sunken boat in the water, his legs turned to jelly, and he couldn't take another step. Because of his fear of the ocean, Truman had no choice but to give up the deal. Instead, he stayed home trimming the hedges. But just then, his wife came back from grocery shopping and immediately launched into a product pitch.
It's a Chef's Pal. It's a dicer, grater, peeler all in one. Never needs sharpening, dishwasher safe.
That's amazing!
And besides his wife, there was someone else awkwardly plugging products too.
That is a beer.
That was Marlon, Truman's best friend. The two of them would often hang out and drink beer, sharing what was on their minds. And Truman's biggest dream was to leave this place and travel to the other side of the world, Fiji. Later, Truman sat alone by the sea, lost in thought. He remembered a time he went sailing with his dad as a kid. Because young Truman didn't want to head back, a sudden storm hit and his father was swept overboard. He didn't survive. That's why Truman was so terrified of the ocean. Just then, rain suddenly poured down from above. But strangely, the rain only fell on Truman. Wherever he went, it followed. Back home, Truman suggested to his wife that they travel the world, but she shot the idea down immediately. She said they had car payments and a mortgage to worry about, and besides, didn't they agree to have a baby? In the end, she talked him out of it, and Truman gave up on the idea of leaving Sea Haven.
Let's get you out of these wet clothes. Come to bed.
At that point, a viewer couldn't help but complain. Every time things got interesting, the camera would cut away. The next morning, Truman headed to work like any other day, but something was off. A homeless man suddenly appeared on the street. When Truman got a closer look, he realized it was his late father. But before he could even react, two strangers grabbed his father and dragged him away.
Hey, what are you doing? Hey! What the? Oh, stop! Out of the way!
Truman tried to chase after them to save his dad, but passersby kept blocking his way, one after another. He watched helplessly as his father was shoved onto a bus. Truman ran after it as fast as he could until a taxi appeared out of nowhere and finally forced him to stop. He immediately told his mother what had happened, but no matter what he said, she refused to believe him. That night, Truman opened a box he'd kept locked away for years. He pulled out a dusty container filled with photos of him and his father. After studying them carefully, he was even more certain he hadn't been mistaken. That homeless man was definitely his father. Just then, his wife suddenly opened the basement hatch. Truman quickly hid the photos and pretended to be fixing the broken lawnmower. Seeing this, his wife launched right into another ad.
You know, we really ought to throw out that mower. Get one of those new elk rotaries.
After she left, Truman opened the box again and pulled out a red sweater. At this point, a curious viewer asked,
"What's he doing?" See, they got rid of her, but they couldn't erase the memory.
Since some newer viewers might be confused, the show aired a quick recap. It turned out that the actress the viewer mentioned was Lauren, the first love Truman had been searching for all along. The first time Truman saw Lauren in college, it was love at first sight. But then his future wife suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She pretended to twist her ankle and threw her arms around Truman, quickly striking up a conversation. And before he knew it, Lauren had vanished. But later, they bumped into each other at the library. So Truman asked Lauren out on a date. But instead of saying yes, Lauren secretly whispered to Truman that they couldn't talk there. She let him pass the cameras, and the two of them sprinted away. But even so, they were still tracked down. Eventually, they made it to the beach, where Truman shared his very first on-screen kiss. But right then, a car suddenly pulled up. Because Lauren had developed real feelings for Truman, she couldn't bear to keep lying to him. So she tried to tell him the truth.
Everybody knows everything you do. They're pretending, Truman. Do you understand? Everybody's pretending.
I don't know.
But before she could finish, a man claiming to be her father dragged her away by force. Truman stood there stunned, with no idea what was going on. The man claimed Lauren was having a mental breakdown.
Get out of here. Come on, find me.
Don't worry. We're going to
See you in
Fiji.
school.
Fiji. We're moving to Fiji.
After that day, Lauren disappeared completely. All she left behind was that red sweater. Under the director's arrangement, Truman ended up marrying a woman he didn't love. And the reason he'd been tearing out models' eyes from magazines was to piece together a picture of Lauren. Meanwhile, Lauren was watching all of this from her TV. She was moved to tears. But after all these years, Truman still hadn't figured out what Lauren had tried to tell him, until one day on his way to work, when suddenly, his car radio glitched out. And what it was broadcasting was a play-by-play of his every move.
Okay, he's making his turn onto Lancaster Square. Oh my God! He nearly hit Nolan. Something's wrong. Change frequencies.
For a split second, everyone froze because of the piercing noise. 2 seconds later, everything went back to normal. Right away, the radio station scrambled to explain they'd accidentally picked up a police frequency, hoping to fool Truman. But this time, he wasn't buying it so easily. Instead of going to work like usual, Truman wandered around the streets, secretly observing the people around him. And sure enough, something was off. Every single person seemed to show up at the exact same spot every day. Same with the cars. And someone was clearly following him. So Truman started running around randomly. He dashed into an office building he'd never been to before. But when he stepped into the elevator, he found it was actually a break room. Seeing things going sideways, 2 security guards quickly ushered Truman out. Truman bolted, but a nearby construction worker didn't react at all. It was so bizarre that Truman started questioning his entire reality, and it only strengthened his resolve to escape. That evening, the director sent Truman's mother over to visit. She pressured the couple to have a baby soon. The whole point was to tie Truman down for good. But later, while flipping through his wedding photos, Truman noticed something shocking. His wife had her fingers crossed. That's the gesture people make when they're lying. A silent plea for God's forgiveness. It meant their entire marriage was a sham. The next day, Truman tried to have a serious talk with his wife, but she seemed completely flustered, rushing to get ready for work, saying she had a major surgery to perform. Something about it felt wrong to Truman. So after she left, he followed her. But the moment he got to the hospital, a nurse stopped him. No matter what he said, she wouldn't let him see his wife. So Truman asked the nurse to pass along a message and turned to leave. But that was just a fake out. Once the nurse walked away, he quietly followed her. But right then, a bunch of patients in wheelchairs came barreling toward him, as if trying to block his path. Luckily, Truman was quick on his feet and dodged them. But then, an orderly appeared, pushing a cart, swaying back and forth, blocking his way at every turn.
Here, let me help you.
Finally, Truman made it to the operating room where his wife was supposed to be. But what he saw next nearly made his jaw hit the floor. Just as the surgeon was about to cut, the unconscious patient suddenly woke up. But before he could enjoy the rest of this little show, security dragged Truman out. After that, he packed his bags and went to a travel agency to buy a ticket to Fiji. But the agent told him there were no flights available for a month because it was peak season. But obviously, this was all the director's doing. Even so, Truman refused to give up on Fiji. He just switched to a different mode of transportation. After buying a ticket, he excitedly hopped on a bus. But the driver pretended the engine wouldn't start and deliberately made the bus spew out smoke.
Everybody off. We've got a problem.
With that, everyone got off the bus like NPCs, without a single complaint. Truman was the only one left standing there, dumbfounded. Later, when his wife got home from work, Truman told her about all the weird things he'd experienced. Then he decided to drive off Seahaven Island. Along the way, they ran into obstacle after obstacle, but Truman refused to stop. He knew all of it was fake, and he was determined to escape no matter what. But they were outnumbered, and the attempt ended in failure. It wasn't until late that night that the police brought Truman back home. He turned to his wife and asked why she wanted to have a baby with him.
You can't stand me.
That's not true.
After answering, his wife turned away. Then she grabbed a can of cocoa powder and started rattling off another random ad.
What the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to?
I've tasted other cocos. This is the best.
What the hell does this have to do with anything? Tell me what's happening!
That outburst terrified his wife to her core. Fearing for her safety, she frantically grabbed a kitchen gadget nearby to defend herself. But Truman snatched it right out of her hands.
Joyce!
Do something!
Her instinctive reaction completely gave away the existence of the cameras, so Truman kept pressing her, demanding she tell him the truth. But just then, there was a knock at the door. Marlon walked in carrying a six-pack of beer. The moment she saw him, Truman's wife threw her arms around Marlon, thinking she was finally saved. Truman gradually calmed down and went outside, where he opened up to Marlon about everything that had been happening. They'd been best friends since they were 7, which is why Truman trusted him so completely. And Marlon's patient, heartfelt words deeply touched Truman. What Truman didn't know was that every single word Marlon said was carefully scripted by the director.
The last thing I'd ever do is lie to you.
And the last thing that I would ever do is lie to you.
Truman was almost convinced, but when he caught Marlon hesitate mid-sentence, he realized that even this lifelong friend was in on it. But what happened next was unbelievable. The director brought Truman's father back to the show, all to put Truman's suspicions to rest and keep him on Seahaven forever.
Green cam. Button cam 3.
I never stopped believing.
And wide curb cam 8.
My son.
Fade up music.
Under the director's guidance, this emotional father-son reunion not only sent ratings through the roof, but also diffused the crisis. Originally, the director hadn't planned for the father's death, but because Truman's dream was to be an explorer, the director arranged for his father to be lost at sea, to do whatever it took to keep Truman from ever leaving. But this storyline didn't sit well with the actor playing the father, so he kept trying to sneak back onto set in every way he could until Truman finally spotted him. But no matter, the director solved both problems in one move. After a good night's sleep, Truman went back to his normal routine the next day. In fact, he seemed even more upbeat than before, cheerfully greeting his neighbor, even playing along with the twin old men's product plugs. Then he headed to work. Since the previous wife had been let go, the director set him up with a new partner. On the surface, it looked like Truman had accepted everything, but deep down, he'd already worked out his escape plan. That night, the crew was monitoring Truman as usual, but then the director got a bad feeling. Truman wasn't sleeping in his bedroom. He was in the basement. They could hear snoring, but something didn't feel right. So the director pulled up the playback, and sure enough, something was off.
If he couldn't have gone up the stairs, he must still be in the room.
over there.
Right away.
Marlon rushed over right away. He went down to the basement. But when he pulled back the covers, all he found was a dummy and a pre-recorded snoring track. Truman was long gone. When Marlon opened the storage closet, he found a tunnel dug through the wall. Truman had clearly escaped a while ago. The director completely panicked and immediately cut the live feed. Since this had never happened in 30 years, viewers everywhere were stunned. To find Truman as fast as possible, the director ordered every single actor to mobilize and conduct a full-scale search. He even raised the sun early, but still nothing. Then it hit the director. There was one place they hadn't checked. He pulled up the ocean cameras, and there he was, Truman, out on the water. The live broadcast was back on in an instant, and viewers everywhere everywhere snapped to attention. Truman had completely conquered his fear of the ocean. He was sailing straight for Fiji. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He unfolded it, and there was the composite image of Lauren. When Lauren saw this from her TV screen, she burst into tears of joy. The director decided to send someone to intercept Truman. But here's the funny part. Not a single actor on set knew how to sail, so the director pulled out the big guns, activating the weather control system. He unleashed violent winds and rain, thunder and lightning.
Give me some lightning. Again. Hit him again.
At first, the director thought this would scare Truman into turning back. He was completely wrong. After being thrown into the sea and climbing back aboard, Truman didn't just keep going. He lashed himself to the boat. At that point, the director couldn't bring himself to continue. After all, he'd come to see Truman as his own child.
Is that the best you can do? You're gonna have to kill me!
But those words only enraged the director. Ignoring everyone's pleas to stop, he cranked the wind up to maximum. A massive wave came crashing down and capsized the boat in seconds. It wasn't until Truman was floating motionless in the water that the director finally killed the storm. But miraculously, Truman had survived. With the last bit of strength he had, he raised the sail. His relentless determination and sheer willpower won over every single person on the crew. Once the waters calmed, Truman kept sailing toward Fiji, savoring the taste of freedom. But before long, the bow of his boat pierced straight into the blue sky. Truman was completely dumbstruck when he walked up and touched it. He discovered it was a painted wall. The world he'd lived in for 30 years was all a set. Truman pounded on the wall desperately, trying to break free from this fake world, but it was no use. Once he calmed down, he started walking along the wall and found a staircase leading to a door, the exit out of Sea Haven.
Can speak.
The director explained that this was a TV show that had brought hope and joy to countless people, and Truman was its star. Sure, everything around him was fake, but he was real. That's why so many people tuned in to watch.
Listen to me, Truman. There's no more truth out there than there is in the world I think. It's safe to see. But in my world, you have nothing.
In that moment, the director sounded like a loving father, calmly trying to persuade Truman to stay. He even walked him through every memory, everything that had happened here since childhood.
You can't leave. You belong here. With me.
When Truman didn't respond, the director started to panic. He urged Truman to